Naruto exclusive videos lemon come out on my boosty. You can watch and subscribe. Link in the description. Enjoy watching. Description: it is clear to everyone that Naruto cannot live without adventures. But life after the war turned out in such a way that the famous blonde had to gather dust, gnawing on the granite of science, trampling her way to her dream. Boredom. True, it turned out that adventures also cannot live without Naruto. Take this, sign for it. The quest called Fall on Tobirama's Head begins. And in this set with Tobirama there are also Hashirama and Madara. Now it will definitely not be boring. Chapter 4. And you believe her? Tobirama looked at Hashirama with disapproval. His older brother was in his element. After hearing Madara's report, the elder Senju was ready to take that stranger's word for it. He lit up when it came to her wanting to settle down here, in the unfinished village. Like it was a good place to settle down. The younger one never stopped doubting for a split second that the girl could be an emissary who would either spy on them or try to kill them. Not everyone likes Hashirama's idea. After all, it would shake the old foundations. By and large, the interclan feuds on the territory of the Land of Fire, which brought benefits to mercenaries from other countries, would end. The current economic structure would collapse. And with their new organized cohesion, the previously disparate clans would make a frightening impression. Not really, Hashirama answered casually, ignoring his relative's sharp, condemning squint. The Yamanaka would soon arrive at the village. Tobirama only chuckled skeptically. His brother was a stubborn one. Tobirama would prove to him that he shouldn't trust any girls. And no, there was no personal animosity towards her, because for a few seconds his pride had taken a crushing blow right before Madara's eyes. She was just a suspicious person. The Yamanaka won't be able to stitch up your slit throat if they make a mistake, Tobirama muttered. He doubted the Yamanaka clan, who were not obliged to swear allegiance from the start and identify spies at Hashirama's behest. And with his conclusion, he made this clear to his brother. Relax already, brother, peaceful times have come. Hashirama understood his brother's worries perfectly. Even being an optimist, he still couldn't believe that this was happening in reality, and that everything was going so smoothly. No one is going to cut anyone's throat. That's what's happening around us now. He spread his arms, inviting Tobirama to look back. At that moment, the elder Senju was shining brighter than a polished copper teapot. Very shining and pot-bellied, from the pride that had inflated it. Construction was in full swing around them. The village, which still had no name, was expanding every day. Hashirama had erected most of the houses with the help of Mokutan, some were built by hand. There, Uchiha and Senju were building the town hall in the central square with joint efforts, showing amazing unity. Hataki, Yumino, even the proud Hyuga were covering the roofs with tiles. In the distance, the cheerful barking of Inuzuka dogs could be heard, mixed with the childish laughter of children. The Haruno clan of merchants who had come to them were treating those who wanted to eat red bean pies and green tea. Idyllic. But Tobirama, looking at all this with his tenacious gaze, is looking for a catch. Sees that in their hands any construction tool can turn into a weapon, and sharp tongues can provide a good reason for a bloody conflict. He certainly believes in Hashirama's dream, sometimes naive and unrealistic, but nevertheless very real. But he does not believe in the people who are involved in its implementation. And therefore he cannot relax. The horrors of war are still fresh, and his own internal wounds rot and bleed, preventing him from living without looking back at the past. If it makes you feel better, try talking to that girl yourself. Interrogate her, but without violence. And if that's not enough, take her under observation. Looking at his frowning brother, the elder Senju said. Still, his brother definitely had problems. At the last sentence, Tobirama curled his lips. It was too much for him to babysit some incomprehensible kunoichi. He had enough of his brother. No matter how much he trusted Madara, it was better for the head of the Uchiha clan to look after this girl. It had its advantages, it should be noted. It seemed that Hashirama had this in mind when he asked Madara for this favor. Firstly, the Uchiha clan, and she knew exactly what kind of clan it was and what it was famous for, sent shivers down the spines of ordinary shinobi. In the Holy of Holies among the red-eyed, this unknown woman would definitely not do anything stupid. Apparently, she understood who she was dealing with, having identified them all. Secondly, Madara knew how to terrify real or potential enemies. If she is stupid, then in front of the head of the Uchiha clan, her banal instinct for self-preservation should kick in. Or fear should make her sit still. Thirdly, if Madara he'll screw up and the girl will be completely screwed and she won't be able to sit in the heart of the Uchiha clan under the watchful eye of their leader, and will pull some not very pleasant trick, Tobirama will be very happy to point out this mistake to him. I will refrain from the latter, but I will interrogate you again. Good idea. Perhaps if he interrogated her again, he would feel better. His paranoia would subside before Yamanaka arrived. So, without wasting any time, Tobirama went to the Uchiha. Yet the crushing blow of reality overtook her. It slammed harder than Sasuke's. Chidori. Naruto then stared blankly at the wall opposite for a long time, right at the spot where Madara was sitting, quite alive, catching the distant sounds of construction with her hearing. Jubi take her. Trick question. How many forbidden jutsu does it take for Naruto to understand that it's better not to touch them? Understanding comes with experience. Unfortunately for her, it's deplorable. Correct answer: 1. If we take into account its scale and catastrophic nature. Naruto learned to accept her mistakes and draw conclusions from them. So to speak, a plus for her maturation. The cruel reality wiped the nose of her innate curiosity and shut up her blatant self-confidence. The stupidity of her actions made her feel shame like never before. An 18-year-old kunoichi, a war hero, a future Hokage, and a brain like a snotty 5-year-old. What should she do now? What to do? How to get back? And 100 other questions were tearing her skull apart with a real headache. Despair was not her style, but she really wanted to. After all, she had absolutely no idea what to do. But she had to start somewhere. No, everything was obvious. She was finished. The end. No matter where she started for herself, no matter what tactics she chose, the shinobi gods would tear her to pieces. Even her knees shook from thinking about them. Living legends can reduce her chances of survival to a critical minimum in the blink of an eye. She saw them in battle and understood perfectly well what a confrontation with them could threaten her with. And Madara made it clear that she did not inspire confidence in her. By the way, she did not inspire confidence in Madara either. And to a greater extent than the others. It was a matter of time before she would be killed. Disemboweled to get the fox in Madara's case. When the bijou gets stronger and regains its power, it will be impossible to hide it. A sensei like Tobirama will quickly understand what kind of stuff Naruto is made of. And no altruist like Hashirama will save her. Then, the most acceptable option: run away. At least it would prolong her life and give her time to figure out how to get back home. Run away, and better as soon as possible. Until potential executioners came for her soul. Madara made it clear that it was better for her not to go out, but Naruto would not be Naruto if she listened to someone's advice. Especially the advice of a maniac, and Madara had become exactly that in her time. And forgetting that a few hours earlier she had lamented the fact that she had not listened to the fox and had done perhaps the biggest stupidity of her entire life, she decided to disobey the Uchiha. Her strength was restored at a snail's pace. But the chakra current was already felt much more clearly. She had enough strength for a couple of simple jutsu, and she knew how to run away professionally. All her childhood she did only this, playing hide and seek with ANBU and ordinary shinobi. It was time to remember the past. Getting up from the tatame, she stretched her numb bones and went to the window, carefully looking out into the street, trying to scout out the situation. Everything looked harmless and peaceful. No guards. Perhaps Madara was relying on his boundless authority. True, such a trick would not work with Naruto. The authority of the strongest shinobi in the village does not scare her. How many of them had she killed in her short and eventful life? But she decided to be more careful. After all, she was on the territory of a very paranoid clan, which was not yet accustomed to peaceful coexistence with the Senju. And a blonde sneaking in the shadows of the Uchiha quarter would clearly arouse suspicion. At any moment, they would cut her down without trial or investigation. It's good that she was dressed in clan clothes. All that's left is to use henge and change the color of her hair and eyes to blend in with the surroundings, otherwise her appearance is too flashy for the locals. She has enough chakra for that. Escaping from the place where she was easy. So easy that it even made her wary. The summer house where she was staying was unguarded, as was the residence of the clan leader. And it was undoubtedly in the heart of their quarter. In Madara's house. Such a gloomy and quiet place could only belong to him. Even the beautifully maintained and blooming garden did not add cheerful colors to this place. Perhaps Madara's home did not need protection, just like its owner himself. The one who would dare to enter here would need protection. This thought made Naruto smile. And she, being a prisoner, clearly needed protection, but there was none. Either all human resources were attracted to the construction site, and there was no pair of eyes to protect a suspicious person. After all, outside this house, the construction of the village was actively underway. The construction was in full swing. Or Madara believed that he had crushed her with his authority and instilled enough fear, and Naruto would not even stick his nose outside, afraid. Madara's threat turned into an empty sound. No one paid attention to her when she slipped out of the territory of the clan head's house onto a more or less busy street. The few passers-by in the same clan clothes as hers were hurrying about their business, paying almost no attention to what was happening around them. If they looked at her, they did not hold their gaze for more than a couple of seconds. Unfortunately, Naruto did not know the layout of the roads in the Uchiha quarter. In her time, this place was considered cursed because of the tragedy. Even being fearless at times, she did not even stick her nose there. It seemed very scary, and the lifeless abandoned houses in which a terrible bloody tragedy had occurred were eerie. It would be strange if she, wearing a Mon Uchiha, get lost, and will rush around here like a trapped animal, looking for a way out. It will look very suspicious. And jumping on the roofs? Not the best idea. No one jumped on the roofs here, hurrying about business. People and shinobi moved on foot on the ground. Although were there any shinobi here at all? No distinguishing marks. And asked the locals for directions, the height of idiocy. Perhaps her escape is also the height of idiocy. Her disappearance could be discovered at any moment, an alarm could be raised, and half the clan could be sent searching for her. Even a genin would figure her out now. And if she fights back, an even deeper shadow of suspicion will fall on her. If she runs, so she has something to fear and hide. Is it logical? Very much so. But also to wait quietly and calmly for the arrival of the Yamanaka clan, stupidity. They will pick her brain thoroughly and understand that she is a threat to them. More precisely, the one who is locked in her. And being weak, Madara will easily remove the Biju from her. Naruto will not have time to squeak, as the head of the Uchiha clan will begin to use the Biju for his own purposes. About the fact that she is from the future. Perhaps they will take her for a schizophrenic. Or maybe they will believe her and try to learn about the future, using her as an invaluable source of information. And then her present will be at risk. Uzumaki is not so stupid as not to understand what the consequences will be if she really got from her present to the past. And it is clearly better not to change it. A couple of modern films, which she managed to get out to, paying tribute to the actress whom she once accompanied on a mission, were very colorfully shown and told that it is better not to interfere with the course of events. The first rule, a holy testament for those who have ended up in the past: don't change the past. Even if it was someone's invention, she didn't want to become a pioneer. Naruto, who will write a set of rules for time travelers, based on her experience, that's not what she wants. What if she blurts out something unnecessary, or tries to eliminate Madara for good as soon as her strength returns, trying to avoid thousands of victims of the last war? Her world will turn upside down. No matter how much this thought tempts her, it's better not to. Look, she already risked checking what kind of scroll it was. The most logical thing to do: leave everything as it is. Pretending not to be tense, Constantly pulling herself away from attempts to turn around, she wandered around the block, looking for an exit, trying not to arouse suspicion. But there was no exit on the horizon. And it seemed that she had already passed by this house, where a woman was diligently picking at the ground, planting her roses, twice. Or even 3 times. And she had also passed by this man, towering on a stepladder and diligently writing out hieroglyphs in calligraphic handwriting on a future fruit stand, more than once. It seemed that she had finally gotten lost. And she was clearly about to arouse suspicion. Girls who walk in circles, not knowing where to go, experiencing considerable tension, do not inspire confidence. And they attract attention. Her nerves were starting to give in. Turning the corner, she leaned against the wall of the house, hiding in its shadow and catching her breath. There was no surveillance. At least, she didn't feel it. But what if they were still chasing her? Or had she fallen into a genjutsu again due to her own stupidity, since she couldn't get out of the labyrinth of streets of the Uchiha quarter? She needed to catch her breath. Throwing off the henge, she restarted the flow of chakra. She didn't feel any noticeable difference. Everything around her was the same. It wasn't a genjutsu. She had simply gotten lost and was starting to panic. And she needed to get out of here as quickly as possible. The faster she did it, the further she would run. She was planning to run into the forest. It was better to live in the forest for now, eat roots and berries, and sleep in caves. She would be able to protect herself from robbers and bandits, but she couldn't protect herself from Madara, Tobirama, Hashirama, and what would follow after the flower growers picked at her skull. No. She needed time to figure out what to do next, and sitting in that house, although not shackled, but being a prisoner, she felt that her time was running out. At any moment, the Yamanaka would show up. Or Tobirama would convince Hashirama that she was a significant threat, and it was easier to kill her than to keep a pig in a poke. Or Madara would cut her because his left heel wanted it that way. There's no point in coddling prisoners, it's easier not to watch them, but to kill them. From dead kunoichi problems less and they were safer. Naruto froze, trying to relax, the internal tension literally paralyzing her muscles and mind. It turned out that all this time she was listening only to the beating of her heart, which was starting to beat in a frantic rhythm. The sounds around her faded, there was only a nervous and crazy heartbeat, and she didn't even notice it. But now, she again hears the sounds of construction, but the trills of birds and the rustling of leaves stand out among these sounds. Birds. Chirping, just like in the forest. In the forest! Naruto opened her eyes and looked around. The house she was hiding behind was hidden in the shadow of tall trees. Literally a few meters away from her was a stone fence surrounding the perimeter of the block, and right behind the fence was a forest. All this time, the exit was right under her nose. It was worth turning into some dead-end alley, jumping over the barrier, and that's it, she's free. That's right. The Uchiha clan stood on the outskirts of the city, apart, just like the Nara, from whose territory one could easily get into the forest that belonged to the reindeer herders. Naruto immediately rushed towards the fence. She easily jumped over it, and without looking back rushed into the depths of the forest, only her heels flashing. The illusion of freedom intoxicated and gave her strength, so she did not notice the shadow that jumped over the fence after her. Chapter 5. A funny thing is a coincidence. Sometimes it plays into your hands. And now Tobirama understood that events had turned out for the best possible time. And he had a good chance to point his finger at her and say, "Execute, cannot pardon." Having gained access to the Uchiha quarter, he immediately came to the stranger to personally interrogate her and understand whether it was worth taking her assurance that she wanted to settle in the village on faith. And he found a most curious picture. The girl was making henge seals, changing the color of her hair, eyes, and hiding the strange stripes on her cheeks that were noticeable to the naked eye. Now with dark hair, brown eyes, and skin that was almost whiter than chalk, she looked very much like an average member of the Uchiha clan. Sticking her nose out the door, she casually walked towards the exit from Madara's house. Escape. She ran before his eyes. The girl didn't notice him. Even when she passed by him, brushing his legs with the hem of her dark blue traditional robe. She didn't understand who she had passed by. She walked away from Madara's abode with a firm gait, not looking at him point blank. And this means she's a shinobi? I don't really believe it. Or is this her tactic, luring him into a trap, sensing that they're following her? Tobirama decided to watch, although inside him there immediately flared up an urge to grab her by the scruff of the neck and drag her to Hashirama, explaining that the girl had run away. Which meant she had a good reason for running away. And she needed to be put under guard, behind bars, and not placed in an almost cozy summer house in Madara's garden. Senju followed her closely, without giving himself away, which was not so difficult. At one point he even managed to cast a light genjutsu on her to throw her off her route, hiding the entrance gate with an illusion. Apparently, by doing so, he added fuel to the fire of her tension. If you looked closely, you could see that she was nervous about not being able to find a way out of the red-eyed clan quarter. And yet, she found a way to leave it. Hiding behind the corner of a house, catching her breath and throwing off her equipment, she jumped over the fence. Gracefully and almost elegantly, without putting in any special effort. Her physical training is quite good. He, like a shadow, followed her, allowing her to feel freedom. But he did not let her revel in this feeling for long. As soon as they went a little deeper into the forest, he revealed himself, throwing a kunai at her. He aimed at her shoulder. To traumatize. He had no intention of killing her yet. He had to prove to his brother that she was a spy and a liar. And as a rule, corpses cannot be talked about. To his great regret, she dodged the kunai, slightly turning her body. The weapon flew a fucking centimeter from her hand. Are you going far? With his words, 2 more kunai flew at her back, a warning not to do anything stupid. And she deftly avoided these, crouching to the ground. After all, she is some kind of shinobi. Anything but that. She intuitively felt an attack from behind. Too bad her instincts failed her, and Naruto missed the surveillance. How mean, she hissed under her breath, dodging the kunai. Her dreams of freedom were mercilessly shattered by a single phrase that sounded like a death sentence. For now, she phrases, only her dreams died. She still had a chance to keep her life to herself. She had already predicted the second attack, sharply diving down to the ground. 2 kunai whistled over her head and with a meaningful crunch dug into the bark of the tree behind her. And that could have been her back. Unarmed, almost without chakra, cornered by Tobirama Senju. It was a failure on all fronts. What should she do? Turning to face him, but continuing to sit on half-bent legs, she assessed the scale of her failure with her own eyes. The look in her crimson eyes did not bode well. And apparently he clearly saw all the despair that was reflected on her face against her will. No matter what she said, he won't believe her. Every step she takes will be seen as a threat. He has an obvious advantage and he understands this, and enjoys the moment, although his face is no different from the one that looked at her every day from the Hokage mountain, just as stony and expressionless. But Naruto felt that he liked that she was in a hopeless situation. Here Tobirama stands like a statue, drilling her with a stern look and in no hurry to grab her by the pelt and drag her to his brother for trial. And he definitely does not take her seriously, which touched her a little to the quick. And this always offended her and pushed her to all sorts of stupid things. Naruto Uzumaki was a master at proving to those around her that she was worthy. But reminding herself that she was weaker than a worm right now, she bit her tongue and clenched her fists, holding back the urge. I give up, she raised her hands, sighing heavily, and slowly, very, very slowly straightened up, trying not to make any sudden movements. Her knees trembled treacherously. And she wasn't entirely sure if it was because of the awkwardness of the position. Senju didn't react at all to the fact that she had given up without a fight. Maybe she just couldn't tell the reaction from his face and eyes, or maybe it was obvious. Tobirama didn't do anything. He just looked at her from under his brows, like an enemy of the people, making her grind her teeth. Such a look was very tense, and the tension around her almost sparkled, making the hairs on her arms and the back of her neck stand on end. All her instincts, along with her sense of smell, Naruto came to the conclusion that with Madara it was somehow easier, freer, and safer? From the last conclusion, she grinned nervously, barely holding back the laughter that was bursting out. Safety near Madara, who would have thought? What do you want? Finally, he broke the tension in the air with his equally stern voice. In terms of? No, she can count on her fingers what she needs. First, to survive. Second, to return home. That's the priority. But he clearly doesn't expect those answers from her. In a straight line, is he speaking a language she doesn't understand? Naruto realized that if he doesn't give an answer, it will be bad. So she thought deeply, looking for a more neutral answer that the distrustful Tobirama would not distort, looking for a subtext that would be dangerous for those around him. Kami-sama, the future second, frightened her even more than Madara. Maybe she wouldn't be afraid, feeling only discomfort next to this magnificent shinobi, if they were equal. But they were far from equal. The pause dragged on. Uzumaki withdrew more and more into herself, losing touch with reality. Out of habit, deep in thought, she reached her hand to the back of her head, burying her fingers in her hair. This gesture somehow magically sometimes allowed her to put her thoughts in order. Apparently, she did it abruptly, because a kunai whistled warningly next to her ear. Tobirama considered the gesture almost dangerous for those around her. Or maybe he hinted to her that the clock was ticking, and he didn't like to wait. At first, her eyes almost popped out of their sockets in amazement. What a mean and nervous guy the second is. And then she was overcome with paranoid. She snorted very loudly, pulling her hand away from the back of her head, throwing the look full of anger towards Tobirama. Fear and a feeling of absolute helplessness began to overshadow her indignation. If I don't answer you, you won't believe me. What's the point of me telling you? Naruto relaxed, which did not escape the sensitive and attentive gaze of the younger Senju. Well, how relaxed? Caution was replaced by anger. Tobirama raised an eyebrow in surprise at the insult. Just now she stood and trembled like a leaf in the wind, and now she hisses at him like an angry viper. As a tactician and strategist, Senju assessed this as the best defense is an attack. She can't rush at him with her fists, so she decided with her tongue. I need to survive, okay? And here you are hinting to me with your whole appearance and behavior that I am not a long-term resident. I am still young, I have dreams, ambitions. Uzumaki continued her fiery speech, not taking her direct and fiery gaze off Senju. The more often her mouth opened, the greater his amazement. Do you even know how to have constructive dialogues with people? I'm not dangerous, if you haven't noticed, and I'm unarmed. Naruto poured out all her indignation, saying everything that came to mind. I don't inspire confidence? Yes. I don't. I'm a stranger. And seeing how hostile you are to me, I should sit still and wait for you or Madara to come for my head? No, thank you. I told you, I want to live. I'm still young, I haven't tried or done a lot in this life. If Madara isn't that rude and uncouth, then you. Naruto didn't have time to finish. She simply wasn't allowed to do it. Tobirama almost knocked all the oxygen out of her lungs, pushing her hard and almost pressing her into the nearest tree, from which leaves fell from the impact. He was breathing angrily, his eyes blazing with anger. Naruto was ready to bet her hand that he was terribly irritated. What a shame! Looking at him, she only smiled impudently. She shook his calm, and that was some kind of lunch. And she didn't care that he was hanging over her like a deadly sword, raised to strike, ready to do its vile work. You can't get her with such tricks, especially if she's in the mood, and a storm is frolicking inside her. Don't try to pull the wool over my eyes, he muttered through tightly clenched teeth, clenching the fabric of the haori he had lent her into his fists. A nightmare, some brat was insulting him, and quite successfully. He was seething. Steam was about to pour out of his ears. She had called him paranoid, more than once, and almost always in a veiled way. And also an uncouth fool. Accused him of attacking an unarmed, albeit potentially dangerous girl. Kami-sama, she had beaten his pride. The wily snake. Does the truth hurt your eyes? She grinned brazenly. No, she understood that she was brazenly stirring up this hive with almost her bare hands. In fact, Naruto was talking his ear off, as she always did with everyone, and he understood her move perfectly, unlike those on whom she had used this technique before. I want to survive. Naruto leaned forward, bumping her forehead into the cold metal of his hapuri, continuing to grin defiantly. And your prejudice, coupled with paranoia, could end my life at any moment. I don't trust you either. It was time for him to start bulging his eyes. She leaned forward so sharply that their noses almost touched, and his forehead was saved from colliding by his hat. Her hot breath tickled his skin and nerves. Especially his nerves. As did her poisonous words. Their poison ate away at his self-control and self-control. He wanted to shake her and slam her head against a tree, so that sparks would fly from her eyes, and so that she would bite her tongue, or better yet, bite it off. With you, everything is clear. I fell on your head, taking you by surprise and in front of Madara. Admit it, your personal dislike for me is stronger than your feeling of mistrust. Some girl stunned the great and mighty Tobirama Senju in front of the Uchiha. Naruto knew where to go next, and she went ahead, continuing her tirade with all the passion and anger raging inside her, pressing on the sore spot. At some point, she even began to enjoy how deftly she was picking under the second's crust, exposing his fears and feelings in words. Perhaps by doing so, she was only digging her own grave deeper. Senju had given in. Shamefully and cowardly, he had made his desire to smash her head against a tree come true. Roughly, without holding back his strength, he had shaken her, causing the back of her head to hit the bark with all his might. And before losing consciousness, she had not lost her confidence in her own words, looking at him as a winner, and not as a hunted animal, the role of which he had imposed on her with his power and influence, trying in every way to intimidate. This was self-defense. This impudent woman had forced him to be vile. It was as if she had picked at his head, dragged out things he was not ready to admit to himself. Yes, he was paranoid, but had the war made him like this? Didn't she understand? Trust could cost blood, or at worst, life. And yes, there was personal animosity. She had disgraced him in front of his brother and sworn enemy. Here you go, he spat angrily, already angry at himself. She was right, she had mercilessly beaten him with her words. She, like a storm, brought a storm into his life. Waves of anger, rage raged inside him, and to his bewilderment, shame. Looking at the blonde who had gone limp in his arms, he grimaced. Women pure evil! Having picked her up in his arms, he went shunshing to Madara's house, where he left her, turning a blind eye to her escape, and at the same time hiding his shame. Well, he lost his composure, lost his temper, and in not the best way shut the mouth of the impudent and brazen girl. Did you talk? Hashirama looked up from the drawing of the future sewer system and the estimate attached to it. Unfortunately, the construction of the village, big expenses. It was time to take on missions. The younger one grimaced. Hashirama's instinct told him that this could hardly be called negotiations. Tobirama wanted an interrogation with partiality. And he clearly could not disdain the methods he knew. I talked, Tobirama squeezed out in a strangled voice and nervously pulled back his sleeve. The elder Senju managed to see dried blood on his brother's wrist. Grabbing his hand, he pulled up the sleeve of his dark suit. Had they really fought and that Naruto had managed to wound his brother? There was no wound. The blood did not belong to his brother. That meant the girl had suffered. It would have been better not to say it. Pulling his hand out of Hashirama's tenacious grip and ignoring his questioning gaze, thirsting for details, he hunched over and approached the drawings. And yet, Hashirama was almost bursting with curiosity. What had happened that his younger brother looked so discouraged and tried to withdraw, to close himself off? Let the Yamanakas pick through her head, and you can decide whether you can trust her or not, the younger Senju said coldly, trying to concentrate on the calculations and the estimate. His head was splitting, as if he had not hit his head against the tree, but had hit it himself. Even so? Hashirama was amazed beyond measure. But seeing how tense his brother was, he realized that it was useless to extract details. At least for now. I still don't trust her. And I won't. The conversation is over, and ignoring the instantly darkened face of his older brother, Tobirama immersed himself in the construction process. At least he tried, distancing himself from what had happened. Chapter 6. Her head was splitting. When would her head stop hurting? Every time she woke up here, it was always accompanied by a headache. She was lying on the tatami, covered with a blanket, staring at the ceiling of the little house where she had woken up a few hours or days earlier. Her sense of time was completely lost. And had she ever fallen asleep here of her own free will? If this continued, would her brain be okay? At first, she had passed out because her strength had left her. Then she had to endure an intense interrogation and the manjikyu. How many times had she passed out then? And now, with Tobirama's gentle encouragement, she had been unconscious. The back of her head was throbbing. Raising herself up on her elbows, she reached for her head. Her fingers got tangled in her matted hair, which was dirty with something, which contributed to the fact that now she had a knot there that was hardly untangling, which only increased the pain. Any attempts to untangle this tangle with her fingers were pathetic and very unpleasant. And it was worth pulling harder, as a new wave of pain rolled over her, almost blinding her. And then she still managed to feel the edges of the wound. And here is the source of her pain, and the reason why her hair was matted into a tangle with an admixture of dried blood. This man almost split her skull. Tobirama. Well, yes, she provoked him. Well, Naruto did not expect that the eternally calm and impeccably cold, like an iceberg, the second could lose his temper from her pathetic provocations. The chronicles lie, describing him as a reserved, reasonable person. If Naruto managed to return to his time, she would correct this shortcoming and give a more accurate, and undoubtedly, truthful characterization of the second. But now it is better to think about something else, and not about a small stupid revenge that would fall on the already dead head of the younger Senju, tarnishing his reputation. By the way, what is most surprising is that she is still on the territory of the Uchiha clan, and not behind bars. Still, she escaped. Okay, so be it, let's be honest, she tried to escape. And now she lies in warmth and comfort, covered with a blanket. It was clearly not she who covered herself. The blanket was carefully straightened out, and it was as if someone carefully tucked it in. Tobirama or something? Funny. First he slams her head against a tree, and then carefully covers her with a blanket, magnanimously turning a blind eye to her escape. It would be better if he treated the wound. Naruto again reached his hand to the back of his head, carefully probing the wound. Get to her through her tangled hair, that's quite a test. Well, at least I have a head on my shoulders, that should be good. Still a goat, Naruto hissed, pulling her hand away and not at all touched by the fact that she was pitted. But for how long? He has it sometimes, a voice with a hint of guilt rang out in the darkness. A tall silhouette loomed in the doorway. Well then? Now Hashirama had come for her soul. Naruto remained silent, standing guard, wary. Hashirama, although he seemed the most harmless of the three, but she knew that he was the strongest of them. A barely perceptible shudder ran along her spine. The god of shinobi made her more nervous than Madara and Tobirama, despite his more kindly attitude towards her. Hashirama walked into the room. And Madara followed him. And someone else, clearly unknown. In the darkness of darkness, apparently it was night, the third was not Tobirama. Madara snapped his fingers, and the lamps on the walls lit up, illuminating the room with a soft glow of fire. Naruto suppressed the urge to roll her eyes. And really a poser? Showing off in front of others, is this some kind of gene in the Uchiha's blood? A stupid waste of power. Lighting lamps with jutsu. The third person was unfamiliar to her. Although, if you looked closely, there was something vaguely familiar about him. In the squint of his eyes, in the line of his chin and his hair. Having looked closely, she realized who he reminded her of Inoichi Yamanaka. And here come the shrinks for her soul. Now she was seriously worried. The room shook, and Naruto was in a storm, even though she was sitting Clutching the edge of the blanket until her knuckles turned white, she tried to grab hold of the reality that was slipping away due to panic. That was it, her end had come. Will you allow me? Hashirama crouched down in front of her and, without waiting for permission, extended his palm to the back of her head, clearly interpreting her condition and confused face as a fit of pain. Although, no. He could understand her correctly. He was simply the first kind man, the likes of which the world had never seen. Madara closed his eyes, expressing his opinion on this matter. He understood that Naruto was simply excited and scared, that's why she was all twisted. Still, Hashirama was more humane than everyone present, and sometimes he deliberately closed his eyes to obvious things. For example, to the pathological cruelty of the Uchiha Madara, and the cruelty and insensitivity of her own brother. Uzumaki realized that she was paralyzed with fear, and her tongue was dry. She could neither nod nor utter a grunt. And was it necessary? Moreover, she was completely paralyzed, right down to her thoughts. A pleasant tingling warmth spread from Hashirama's palm. He was healing her wound. Naruto even relaxed for a moment, feeling how the throbbing headache disappeared, suppressed by the first healing chakra. But her fear was much stronger, and again firmly fettered her entire being. Madara chuckled something under his breath. She has a concussion, and a head injury is clearly a poor aid to the procedure Mr. Isao is about to perform. Translating the chuckle for himself Uchiha, Hashirama justified himself. After finishing his treatment, he sat aside, allowing the man from the Yamanaka clan to take his place right in front of the clearly frightened Naruto. The man immediately approached and sat down, stretching out his arms. Placing his cool palms on her temples and thereby fixing her head, because she immediately tried to move away, he immediately used a jutsu, penetrating her consciousness. Madara and Hashirama froze in anticipation. I don't understand. Isao tried to penetrate her consciousness for the 5th time, but it was all in vain. Each time he ran into a wall. And when he tried to break through it, he was thrown out of her head. A bead of sweat trickled down his forehead from the strain. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't penetrate the barrier. Her consciousness is closed to outside interference. He delivered his verdict, dropping his hands. Seal. Madara watched the Yamanaka clan leader's attempts with grim satisfaction. It would have been a punch to the gut if he had broken the barrier in a matter of seconds by penetrating it into his head. But Isao had been trying to break the barrier for over 2 hours now, and had failed every time. Madara had spent the same amount of time trying to do it before he realized all efforts are useless. This Naruto's mental consciousness is blocked from outside interference. Uzumaki? Hashirama looked at the man, thinking about something. Looks like Uzumaki, but Isao thought for a moment, trying to describe what he saw more accurately and precisely. Most likely it is based on their clan's Fuinjutsu style, but there is a lot of stuff in there that I have not encountered before. It was at these moments that he was knocked out of her head. If Yamanaka knew approximately how to break the seal that hid consciousness from outside interference, made by the hands of the craftsman from Uzushio, then this was something new and smelled of a real and priceless brainchild of a Fuinjutsu master. And he shared his conclusions. Fuinjutsu market was booming. Uzushio sold seals to his allies, sometimes secret techniques on how to reproduce a particular combination of Fuin to achieve the desired result. Various barriers, explosive seals, storage scrolls, weapons with hidden weapons. In the hands of Uzumaki masters, a simple, insignificant trifle could become something terrifying and dangerous. Being an island nation, they had no choice but to sell their developments, although they were not a pity to give them to the masses. Seals on the mind were popular with spies. They were as varied and sophisticated as the imagination of their authors. The Yamanaka encountered them, dissected them, sometimes hacked them. But now, this was definitely a masterpiece, a unique seal. And not for the masses. She's a spy, Madara concluded. Since she has a seal on her consciousness, it means Tobirama was right, as sad as it is to admit. Most likely. Allow me to take my leave. Isao rose from his knees. His work was done. Thank you, Isao-sama. Hashirama bowed, thanking the head of the Yamanaka clan for the service rendered. Madara stepped aside, letting the guest out of the room. Maybe she's an Uzumaki? Hashirama naively assumed. He had heard that few ninjutsu masters hide their knowledge behind their own seals, because they know that there are people with Yamanaka abilities who can steal their secrets and mysteries on which their economy and immunity are based. Or the same Uchiha, who can skillfully manipulate consciousness with the help of the Sharingan. She is blonde, Madara retorted. Everyone knows that Uzumaki's scarlet-haired. Madara approached the tatami on which the blonde was lying. From repeated attempts to penetrate her consciousness, she passed out. She looked pale and exhausted. In a word, it's a pity. But Uchiha pulled out a kunai, cold-bloodedly aiming at her heart. Instant death would be a mercy. Madara, Hashirama growled, seeing the kunai in his hands and a face full of determination to stab the sleeping girl. Spy, Uchiha's voice rang like steel. Hashirama has a soft heart, and Madara has a firm hand that won't hesitate to drive the tip of a kunai into her chest. Well, and of course, instead of a heartstone. Not a fact, Hashirama continued to insist on his own. Well, he didn't want to spill someone's blood in vain. The seal on her mind fact, Madara raised his hand to strike. Hashirama is stubborn and stubborn, it is useless to argue with him. She is an enemy, and he mercilessly lowered his hand. Time will show, the kunai hit the wooden barrier with a crunch. The crooked roots wrapped the girl's chest like a dense cocoon, preventing her from piercing her heart. You are a fool, Madara's eyes were blazing with anger. He angrily pulled the kunai out of the wood, sending splinters flying in all directions. My intuition tells me that she is not an enemy, Senju said, ignoring the insults. Yes, it would be logical to kill her, and humane to do it while she was unconscious. Madara knew how to kill in such a way that even a living person would not immediately understand what had happened. Hashirama knew how to do it too. Life had taught him. And his hand would not have trembled, only his heart would have trembled. For some reason. A strange impulse of a stupid and soft heart. I will kill her if I believe that her actions are aimed at harming us, Madara muttered, hiding the kunai in the bosom of his haori. It is useless to argue with this fool. A waste of time and nerves. Maybe Hashirama is right again, as he was right that they can live peacefully and, relying on this, build a village, realizing their childhood fantasies. But again, time will tell. This Naruto really did not look much like an enemy, but that is the point of spies, that they must gain trust and not arouse suspicion. Therefore, she automatically deserved mistrust of her person. But it must be admitted, she also aroused interest. Potentially strong, perhaps acquainted with the master of Fuinjutsu Uzumaki, which, by the way, could be useful from a political point of view. Perhaps Hashirama all same not let down flare.